Hello everybody, my name is Brothers XV. Welcome. Today we're going to be covering mob resistance and vulnerabilities in 5 minutes or less. So if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and leave a comment below what you want to see explained next. I stream on Twitch, so you'll see the link below. First things first, shout out goes to my guild Demise. The leadership spent a lot of time and energy gathering this information and then putting it together in a slide in a very digestible and easy to read format. I can't take credit for any of this. I joined the guild kind of late, and they already had this presentation made, prepared, and they gave me permission to share it with the rest of the New World community. So in the comments, guys, if you don't mind, give them a thank you if you really enjoy it. And without further ado, let's actually get into it. All right, mob resistance vulnerabilities, really what is it? Each enemy mod type, corrupted, ancient, lost, beast, and angry earth all have specific damage types that they take additional and reduced damage from. Additional damage increased by 15% for the vulnerable type and decreased by 15% for the resistant type. When damaging a mob, an icon will show up next to the damage value. If there are 2 small arrows above the icon, it means the mob is vulnerable to that damage type. You see that example in the bottom right. If there are 2 small arrows below the icon, it means the mob is resistant to that damage type, and you see that example in the bottom left. The following table shows each mob's vulnerability and resistance across each damage type. So let's visualize what I just said. We have physical and we have magic damage types, and we know it works on a 15% rule. If we have a weapon that does 1,000 damage, if the monster is resistant, it will receive the 1,000 damage, and then it will be multiplied by 1 minus 0.15. This total will give us 850, which is the total damage if it's resistant. If the monster is vulnerable, the opposite's going to happen. We're going to have 1,000 damage, the original stack, and we're going to multiply it by 1 plus 0.15. That's going to give us 1,150, the preferable damage. But wait, you might say, brothers, you just said that there's 2 different damage types, and right now in that example, you're only using 1 damage. Well, let me explain. I'm going to use an example weapon I found on Amazon's website. The first thing I want you to look at is the 10% fire damage modifier. This makes sense because at the bottom we have 156 slash and 15 fire. This shows us one not as important thing and one super important thing. First, the non-important thing is that when you take 10% of 156, this gives you 15.6. Normally, that would round up to 16 if you're good at algebra. However, Amazon, I guess you're not that good at algebra, rounds it down to 15. But however, the more important thing that we should really look at is the fact that fire and physical slash are calculated entirely separately. And the same thing is going to happen with vulnerability and resistance. The 2 are calculated independently. Now that we know the 2 different damage types are calculated independently of each other, for the rest of the video, we're going to be using an example weapon that does 1,000 physical damage and 100 magic damage to see what kind of effects a weapon with different combinations will have on each respective monster mob type. So we'll use almost every example when we talk about the corrupted, because what you're going to find is that this pattern will start repeating itself. So you always want to try to get double vulnerable situations. And for corrupted, if we use an arcane bow, bows which are thrust weapons, and arcane would be the magic amplifier there, you'd get a 15% amplifier on both aspects, physical and magical. So we have 1,100 times 1.15 for both would give us 1150 and 115 for a total of 1265. Again, this is the best case scenario. However, let's say we're on the opposite end of the spectrum and we use a frost maul, which is going to be strike and frost. We're going to be doing again the 1,100 times 0.85, which would be 850 and 85 respectively, giving us a total of 935. For the next example, let's say we have a lightning sword. So it's going to do slash and lightning. I'll just say as light. We're going to have 1,000 slash damage and 100 lightning damage. However, because they don't get modifiers, they're normal, we're going to be times 1, which is going to equal 1,000 and 100, which obviously is going to be our original damage stack of 1,100. So let's see what happens when we use an arcane maul, which is strike and arcane. We're going to have 1,000 physical damage turn into 850 because they're resistant, and we're going to have 100 damage turn into 115 because it's vulnerable. That's going to give us a total of 965. So even though we have 1 vulnerable and 1 resistant, note, it does not cancel out. Again, let's look at it the other way. let's say we have we have a thrust and frost. This would be like a frost bow. We have 1,000 damage turn into 1,150, and we have 100 damage turn into 85. This gives us a total of 1,235, which is not as bad, but again, slightly off the best case scenario. Let's continue looking at our examples by changing our attention to ancients. Ancients are vulnerable to lightning and void. They're actually the only ones vulnerable to void. They're resistant to slash and fire, and they're also vulnerable to strike. So when you're fighting ancients, you want to think about Thor. By that, I mean you want to use a strike and you want to use lightning. So you basically want to use Thor's hammer. You'll turn your 1,100 damage to the best case scenario, which is 1,265. However, if you fight like as if you're Roy from Smash Bros., you're taking slash, you're taking fire, and you're turning 1,100 into your worst case scenario, which is 935. Let's continue and look at beasts. Beasts are very interesting because the only thing that they're vulnerable to is thrust physical damage. So think as if you're Legolas and you have a bow. But really, it doesn't matter what else you use because there's no other amplifiers to them. You don't have to worry about resistance at all. All you gotta do is make sure you're using a thrust weapon and you're good to go. So we're gonna be taking our 1,000 physical damage if we're using a thrust weapon. And we still have our 100 magic. And we're turning the 1,000 to 1,150. And we're turning our magic still into 100. We add it together and we're getting 1,250. This is best case scenario for beast. Now, there's no real worst case scenario other than taking our 1,100 and just keeping it at 1,100. So now that we're done with beast, there's really no other special combinations with the other two types of monsters. With lost, you're just looking at the fact that they're vulnerable to frost, and lightning, and nature, as well as strike. So we still want to be using mauls of, again, these three types. You want to avoid bows, and you want to avoid void. Avoid. All right, so let's look at the last mob type, which honestly make the most sense. If you were fighting an angry plant, what would you use? A sword to cut it and fire to set it all on fire, right? Like that makes sense. It turns 1,100 into 1,265 like you want. Avoid using lightning in nature and avoid using bows. I want to share one more thing with you guys, which is every possible combination when attacking a monster with physical and magic. Obviously, you always want to maximize vulnerability with double vulnerable. However, if you don't know what to do, maximize whatever's higher. On this weapon, physical damage is higher. So as long as you have a vulnerability on that weapon, you're good to go. After that, you hit neutrals and then go straight off what's vulnerable, then neutral, then resistant. And then worst case scenario, if you're resistant, the damage goes vulnerable, neutral, and then resistant as well. The only time this will not hold true is if the magic amplifier is greater than 100%. The only time. So if you have a modifier that says the sword gets 110% fire damage, this is not going to be true. Instead, this would be magic and this would become physical. Everyone, I hope I really explained that well. I hope you guys left this video with a good understanding of what the resistance vulnerability system is. If I didn't, please leave a comment below. Hit me up on Discord, Twitch, whatever. I'll explain it to you guys even better in person. So again, thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you guys on the next one.